Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor-in-chief of eWEEK, and today we're talking about IT operations as a service, and we're going to drill down into a very trendy term, which is AIOps. Everyone's talking about AIOps today. To shed light on that, I'm going to talk to a real expert, which is Ciaran Byrne, Vice President, Product Management at OpsRamp. Ciaran, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, James.
It's interesting about AIOps in that it really helps us decode all the data that flows through our IT operations. There's so much data, flowing through our IT operations these days. It's almost like the humans can't keep up. And so we have AIOps to help us handle that data. But I think there's sort of a little bit of an irony there in that we've built these systems that are so complex with the data going every which way so fast. We actually need to build an entirely different system, a helping system called AIOps to help us run our own system. Is that not slightly odd about us humans, what we've built?
It is an interesting kind of dilemma that we have, and I think we're very early, even in the evolution of trying to solve this
Hmm.
dilemma, which
Right.
is the onset and historically how the predecessor to AIOps were rules-based systems.
Hmm.
But the reality of what's happened over particularly the last 3, 5 years with digital transformation, cloud kind of explosion,
Hmm.
and just the transition from what was servers running on and applications running on bare metal to it
Right.
being completely transformed. The rules went out the window.
Right.
And
Virtualization and containers. Sure.
I think that a new model was needed and is needed. But I also think we're very, very early in ensuring that that new model actually really, really works and really is sustainable, and that people actually understand and see value out of it. I think we're making progress, but I also think that there's a lot more to be done.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to, I've seen figures where the AIOps market right now is around 17 billion, 15 to 17 billion annually. And then, so there's some rosy predictions that say maybe 40 billion by the year 2026. So you're definitely seeing the AIOps emerging technology as truly in its infancy, not mainstream, certainly at all right now.
I think a lot of companies and there's definitely, there's so much interest in AI ops and what it is. And there's also a lot of interest in just understanding what it is.
Right.
And what was originally a definition that was more around event management, event correlation. How
Hmm.
do you figure out the signal from the noise? It's expanded to so many other domains beyond that. And, now you're hearing other terms like ML ops and so on. But
Hmm.
I definitely see that. I still think that it's in its infancy. And I think that there's a lot of companies that are like almost every vendor you could say has some level of AI ops, or many
Right.
have some level of AI ops capability, some bolted on. And frankly, some maybe for, hey, I have that too. uh,
Right. Right.
RFP comes in. Do you have AI ops capability? Yes, we do have that. So
Sure.
we're good. But
Well, there was a while there where people were doing cloud washing. Let's say like 2012, 2014. Like, is it cloud based? Oh yeah, no, it's definitely the cloud. Sure. Maybe AIOps is going on is in that same trend now.
I think it is, and I think there is some. I do think that there is some level of AI ops washing that's going on, and I
Mhm.
do think that every I think that there is so much interest in it, and coming from a company that has background in monitoring and observability,
Mhm.
many people that come to check out and evaluate, they're like, hey, can we start with the AI ops? So that may often be the starting point. It's like, hey, show me the AI ops.
Right.
And
Interesting.
where they may really have the fundamental thing that they may need is visibility and monitoring. And I won't say AI ops is the icing on the cake, but AI
Hmm.
ops is definitely a layer. It's not the only thing that they need to solve. It's definitely
Right.
something that they need to solve for, but it's not the whole picture. Is my view on it.
You're saying that visibility and monitoring are of in the same category as AI ops, so maybe they need to deal with those things as well as AI ops.
I also think that they're interlinked. I think that in my experience from an monitoring perspective, that if you think of event management, which are the alerts that are generated from monitoring systems, so that you could have an AIOps perspective in monitoring, which is how do I know when things are deviating from the norm?
Mhm.
And then you have an event management perspective, which is, hey, lots of these different things have deviated from the norm. What do I
Right.
need to do about it?
Right.
And it, like, who do I need to contact? How do I fix it? There's
Mm.
so many different use cases that I believe, and like even what's related. But I do think that in this particular space, that the baseline or the foundation for a really strong AIOps system, in my view, is a really strong monitoring system because they're
Mm.
interrelated.
Right.
And the challenge that I've seen for AIOps systems is that without the context, it's actually difficult to perform really, really good AIOps on top of any data that you really may not have. If you don't have the context, then what tends to happen is data that you're trying to manage and deal with, if it's not your own, if you don't have the context or understanding of that data, then how do you make sense of it? And
Mhm.
that's where challenges come in, which are,
Right.
in other words, if it's not your own data that you're trying to apply algorithms and machine learning to, and if it's some other data that's coming from, I don't know, many, many different places, well, that
Right.
data all looks different in all of those different places. So how do you naturally and normally tie that all together to make sure that there's some, and if the data doesn't have context,
Right. Right.
and then what do you do if you don't have context to say, then what tends to happen is you need to add context to it. So then if you've
Right.
got some data coming from one stream over here and then another stream somewhere else, it's like, well, how do you add context to both of those to make sure that they make sense? And I think that those tend to be some of the challenges that exist in AI ops systems. And
Mhm.
that's where, if you can accompany, that's where I believe that if you have a monitoring system that has event management capabilities, then you can kind of get the best of both worlds. And the event management, I always think of event management sitting on top of observability or
Mhm.
monitoring to
Right.
give you that kind of perspective, because the monitoring system would know, for example, topology or relationships or
Mm.
what it is that it just has that information, or it can get that information more readily. It's more readily available.
Right. I mean, you've talked about some of the challenges. I'm wondering, is the technology in its infancy in terms of adoption because the technology of AI ops is still relatively immature, or is it simply like some of the customers don't know it's there and don't know how to use it? I mean, why is the market moving still slowly at this point?
That's a really good question. I think that there's many factors. I think that there's one factor, which is, unfortunately, there may be certain organizations that are disincentivized to adopt
Oh, interesting.
technology that would be give you operating efficiencies, for
Yeah.
example.
Okay. And
So if you
and
take
why
it,
why would they be disincentivized for that?
if you take an example where somebody is, a company is providing a service to another company, and that company is monetarily compensated by
Yes.
whatever
Right.
to handle a
Right.
ticket for you, and that'll cost $10.
Right.
So if through AI ops and machine learning and other ways you can optimize that, well,
Mm-hmm.
there's different ways of looking at that. Well, that company could look at that as a competitive differentiator, which
Yes.
is a good thing, or they could look at that as a, hey, I may potentially lose revenue.
So you say perhaps some of the managed service providers are not
Yes,
so happy about AI ops because it's doing their job to a limit to a certain extent.
they could be. It depends on the perspective. If you're looking at it from a perspective that sees it as an opportunity, I think it's a good thing. If you look at a perspective of, hey, it's taking it away kind of my revenue, then that's to me, that's the wrong way of looking at it. To me, it's
Right.
about providing a better service
Hmm.
to that particular customer, even if it may impact. I think it's a short-term view, but I have seen that view, which is unfortunate, actually.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. So let's talk about OpsRamp itself. I know, in case not everyone knows fully what the company does, could you give us a sense of what OpsRamp does and some and the AIOps platform that you offer?
all right, now thank you for the opportunity. So really what, if I think of OpsRamp, I almost sometimes describe it as, as one way of thinking about it is the journey is really from it, and I call it D2R. That's my
Mm.
marketing moniker, which stands for discovery to resolution. And what I
Ah,
mean
okay.
by that is
Hmm.
organizations are interested in visibility. So the very first step of visibility is to understand what you have from an infrastructure perspective. So,
Hmm.
and then when you're understanding what you have from an infrastructure perspective, it could be various cloud providers, it could be virtualized environments. Many of our customers have on-premise, on-premises here is going to be here for quite a while.
Right.
Even though that transition is happening, people may have Kubernetes environments. So really what OpsRamp does to begin with is it discovers those environments. So it tells you what you have, which is
Yep.
very, very important for many organizations. And many times people's eyes light up when they go, I didn't even know I had that
Oh, okay.
that,
Yeah.
that kind of
Hmm.
that type of a state. The
Hmm.
second thing, once you know what you have, the next thing is really about monitoring. How do you monitor what you have? So what OpsRamp does out of the box is it provides native monitoring for those different types of environments. So if you have
Hmm.
Kubernetes, if you have if you have an AWS estate, there's 60 plus services that OpsRamp collects metrics for example, with AWS,
Yep.
um, all the metrics, brings that all together. Then what it does is there's various AIOps capabilities that does things like forecasting, anomaly detection. So the next piece of it is you're generating alerts, for example. So then it's really the first piece I talked about is really about discovery and monitoring. The next piece is
Right.
really about event management. We
Okay.
also see a very strong push for automation. In other words, why even have somebody work on a ticket when you know what the fix is, when you know that it shouldn't be even attended to because it's the backup job that runs at 2 a.m. every Sunday. So
Right.
that's machine learning kicking in to say this is actually noise. So nobody should actually have to deal with it, as well as various automation. It could be an escalation. It could be here's the script that needs to execute for this. And that's really where the resolution comes into it.
Hmm.
And all of that sits on top of a multi-tiered, multi-tenant environment, which is really, really popular for, if you think of MSP customers, which
Hmm.
MSPs could have thousands of customers, and that tends to be
Right.
what we see with the larger MSPs that OpsRamp serves, as well as enterprises, which look at a slightly different lens, and the lens may be more from a line of business perspective. So
Right.
they may want to say, okay, here's a line of business that I want to have operate in a certain way, and maybe that line of business needs to integrate with a different set of tools, for
Hmm.
example. But essentially, what OpsRamp is discovery to resolution, all of that in one platform. It's not 10 different tools. It's one seamless product
Okay.
that really, and the target user is really, it tends to be this the if you think of the environments tend to be hybrid infrastructure, so you could be bringing in network
Hmm. Hmm.
people, storage, cloud ops. There's some fuzziness that's happening there where there were particular kind of subject matter experts, whereas now you go into the cloud world and the cloud ops person is doing a bit of storage and a bit of
Right.
networking and a bit of compute and a bit of
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
So we really see those SMEs, subject matter experts, as the primary personas that we address. Then, of
Hmm.
course, there is the NOCs, there are SREs type of use cases, particularly when you get into the event management.
Hmm.
So those are kind of the primary folks within an organization that OpsRamp serves.
Interesting. Well, let's take a look at the future for a second. If you think about, AI ops, say in the year 2025, not that long from now, what sort of predictable advances do you think we'll make, and how can companies get ready for that now?
I think that's a really great question. I think that I see a lot more happening in the predictability. kind of space, the
Aha. Okay.
prevention space.
Forecasting and predictability.
Yeah, I think that to me, that's really like, how do you, like, there's different views on predictability. There's a predictability which is, hey, something's happened already. How do I prevent it from happening again? Or how do I know about it earlier in
Right.
that cycle? I think that to me, that could be somewhere between now and, maybe in the next year or two. But I really think, how do you have the signals to know something is even could possibly break? I
Right.
think that's a really, really hard nut to crack. But if I look at that from an IT operations perspective, how do I know the change that I'm going to push is going to have this on it, this consequence? How do I know that this is going to result in an outage? So I think a lot of the focus up to now has been on, how do I quickly detect it? How do I quickly resolve it? But
Hmm.
I think, how do you even kind of, everyone's talking about shifting left. It's like that shift left to just even know that it's going to
Right.
happen before it happens. And it
Uh-huh.
hasn't happened already. Because if it's happened already, then that's one perspective. But environments are so dynamic and changing so quickly. The
Hmm.
thing is, that exact same thing going to happen again? Who
Right.
knows? I think 10 years ago it did, or 15 years ago it did. Because I experienced it in my SRE days, where you'd see similar type of failures happening.
Hmm.
But the failures that may happen in the future may not be failures that organization has seen in the past. So I think that's
Right.
really the prevention, predictive. And I know there's a lot of talk about that right now, but I don't think it's the what I've seen so far is not preventing outages that you haven't seen before.
So it's so the predictability piece you're talking about actually could possibly allow IT managers to actually stop that thing from happening because they've seen it predicted by the AI app system.
And it's particularly something that hasn't happened before. And I think that's going to be a hard nut to crack. But I think that, to me, that's because that's, if you think about, like, what's the ideal state in operations, it's like
Hmm.
there's no outages, there's nothing that impacts customers, that they're
Right.
just not experiencing that pain that they've experienced before. And there's lots of companies that are still leaving tens and tens of millions of dollars on the, you know suffering from, as a result of long running outages, or even outages that they're not necessarily, they're subtle and they may not even be aware of them.
Right. Kieran, I think you said it. I will keep an eye on that predictability piece. Seems like a pretty good prediction. I very much appreciate you sharing your knowledge today. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed the chat, James. I really appreciate it. Thank you.